From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory, and welcome to Coast AM. Later on tonight, Ghosts of Country Music. Ooh, get ready for that. By the way, Mel Gibson had to cancel his first hour appearance tonight on the program. He had to run off to Boston. We will reschedule. Looking forward to talking to him. Darn. Here's what's happening. President Donald Trump has signed a new executive order placing a 90-day ban on people from 6 mainly Muslim nations. Iraq, which was covered in the previous 7-nation order, has been removed from the new one after agreeing to additional visa vetting measures. This directive, which includes a 120-day ban on all refugees, takes effect on March 16th. The previous order, which was blocked by a federal court, sparked confusion at airports and mass protests. Presented as a means to strengthen national security against terror threats, it was blocked by the courts and effectively remains on hold. Continuing a pattern of provocative actions, Iran this weekend test-fired a pair of ballistic missiles and then sent fast attack vessels close to a U.S. Navy ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Not smart. And North Korea was practicing to strike American military bases in Japan with its latest barrage of missile testing. Leader Kim Jong-un presided over the launches, feasting his eyes on the trails of ballistic rockets. The report from the Korean Central News Agency said, in language that will only heighten tensions in the region. The 4 ballistic missiles fired Monday morning, launched by a military unit tasked to strike the bases of U.S. forces in Japan. Now, the United States has numerous military bases in Japan as part of its post-war security alliance with that country. And, of course, Japan moved to the highest possible alert level after North Korea fired those 4 ballistic missiles. 3 of the missiles fell into what is called Japan's exclusive economic zone, one dropping about 350 kilometers west of the nation in the ocean. Charles R. Smith, an expert on Korea with us. Charlie, I feel something's going to happen. This can't continue.
Well, it certainly is starting to reach a peaking point here. The latest information is that the North Koreans have imposed a travel ban on all Malaysians, and Malaysia has responded by banning all North Koreans from leaving their country. So,
and that's all over the death of the half-brother, right?
That's correct. So in addition to the missiles flying, which was a 4-missile barrage, a very nice tactical test of what would be basically a military opening round, the North Koreans certainly seem to be trying to start something with somebody. Almost anybody. They're not on China's happy list either. And of course, we've got an exercise ongoing in South Korea at the moment. In addition to the new THAAD anti-missile system arriving in Osan, it appears, at least from the initial blush, that a 4-missile barrage, in this case they were long-range Scuds, would potentially defeat the single battery that we have at Osan. So don't be too surprised if the game gets upped and we start seeing either Aegis-armed warships or additional THAAD units being moved to South Korea.
Do you think it's conceivable that there will be a coup within North Korea?
That is possible. The Chinese have apparently had second thoughts about the North Korean regime, obviously by imposing a ban on importation of North Korean coal, which is a major export for the North Koreans. And there was a number of people who were speculating that the brother, Kim Jong-nam, was potentially part of a Chinese, at least, threat to overthrow Kim Jong-un, because he had met in Beijing repeatedly over the holiday season with a number of high-ranking members in Beijing, as well as the Chinese People's Liberation Army, several of the generals.
All right, Charles, we're going to be in touch with you because I have a feeling this is going to break loose. This is a very tense story, folks. I've got to tell you, you know the way my gut is, and I've been pretty accurate for years. Something's going to happen there. It's going to be a test of the Trump administration, to be sure, regardless of all this other stuff that's going on with wiretaps and Russians and things like that. North Korea is a tinderbox, and it's about ready to explode. And we cannot permit this whack job to continue testing his missiles. He's got nukes. All he needs is the payload ability to get them here or to get them somewhere. And he's getting them. He's very close to Japan. He could probably hit Japan now. Something is going to happen. Write that on the calendar. I said it tonight. General Motors is laying off 1,100 workers in Michigan. That's not good news. The fourth layoff it's announced since November. The company is eliminating the third shift of its Lansing Delta Township plant, which makes 3 SUVs built on the same platform. House Republicans have released the text of their long-awaited Obamacare replacement bill, proposing to eliminate the various taxes and penalties tied to the original legislation while still preserving certain patient protections. I would hope they would do that. The more time you spend staring at your smartphone, scrolling through Facebook, trolling on Twitter, snapping on Snapchat, the lonelier you're prone to feel, according to researchers. A national study on young adults found that frequent use of social media might be associated with increased feelings of isolation. Well, you know how I hate clowns. In the Pittsburgh area, extra police are patrolling cities there after 2 men with weapons dressed as clowns frightened a group of children. Police from West Milford and the city of Pittsburgh went searching for the men. As soon as the father of 3 of the children called 911, the search did not turn up any evidence. But what else is going on? Let's check in with astronomer Stephen Cates. Dr. Sky, what a week it's starting off, Stephen.
Wow, George, so many exciting news stories, and some interesting and perilous. But we begin our short journey through time and space here. We're talking about the first woman in space. Russian Valentina Tereshkova turns 80 today. And until now, most of us were told, George, that this mission that she had was flawless back in 1963. But recently, in some of her memoirs, she's written this, and I find it interesting. Her spacecraft was actually pushed too far out into space, and if it weren't for her and some very smart ground controllers, she might have perished in space. She made 48 orbits of the Earth in 3 days, all this back on June the 16th of 1963. Vladimir Putin, of course, honored her today with a special painting. Her call sign was like a seagull, and he did a beautiful painting. He didn't, but somebody gave her that. But something very interesting. She's one of 4 female Russian cosmonauts to have ever gone into space. Svetlana Savitskaya, of course, followed her back in 1982. Interesting news from space. But in the live sky, George, the stuff that the listeners tell me they love so much, you mentioned before, this has been a very interesting month. March is usually one of the better months for sky watchers all through the listening audience. You'll notice, folks, the next few days that the moon continues to race on to its full phase. That happens on Sunday. Magically, this is the full worm moon as many parts of the nation start to warm up and things start to grow again. But something that everybody should take a look at, I'm looking at it right now from my Phoenix location, the planet Jupiter, now rising around 10 p.m. George local time, right in the southeastern sky. And if you have an opportunity to get a small telescope out there now, you're going to see this. The planet Jupiter with the red spot moving a little to the left of center on the planet. On the left side, George, the satellites Io and Ganymede are very close together. You can see them on the left side with South at the bottom. And that mysterious satellite Europa just to the right side of Jupiter, and Callisto all to the right. Jupiter now is some 428 million miles away. The Juno spacecraft continues to work flawlessly. And, George, Jupiter will become the most dominant planet in the late evening into morning. Venus still beautiful into the west, cascading in toward the sun. If you get a telescope or binoculars, it looks like a tiny crescent moon. And above all, always remember to keep your eyes to the skies.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. Up next, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, as we talk about reincarnation, ancient civilizations, and past lives. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us, of course. He is an expert on hypnotherapy, time travel, reincarnation, you name it, he's got it. Here's Dr. Bruce Goldberg. Dr. Bruce, I want to thank you, first of all. Mel Gibson canceled late notice, could not make it tonight, and you stepped in, and I appreciate that, my friend.
Well, George, excuse me, George, I will always be happy to fill in. I hope you can bear with my voice tonight. I'm overcoming the last part of a cold.
Oh, yeah, well, we'll get by. We're not straining you, are we?
No, that's okay. I'm here, always here for you. I want to thank you for your kind introduction and also for your kind review of my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book, where you describe it as Dr. Goldberg guides you into a world beyond your wildest expectations, highly recommended. As we discuss the ancient civilizations with past life regression as the source of the information, what it brings up is a very important concept, and that is that when you explore past lives and you deal with reincarnation, you overcome the fear of death. The number one fear people have when they reach their 55 plus. So reincarnation shows that the soul is permanent and eternal, and that the physical body, although respected, is only a temporary vehicle.
You know, Bruce, you and I have been chatting, interviewing for at least 13 years now on incredible stories dealing with past lives, reincarnation. I'm convinced at this point now, especially after talking to you all these years, that reincarnation is the real thing. And what's so fascinating is a lot of psychotherapists and people like that are coming forward with cases of little kids, for example, and they're convinced that past life regression works and that something is to it. Isn't that remarkable?
Well, yes, it gives what we call suggestive evidence. You're never going to prove reincarnation. There are too many alternative hypotheses, true. But in science, we use the term suggestive evidence, which means that, well, one of the best examples is my Search for Grace case that was made into a TV movie based on my book of the same name, in which the network documented a case of a woman who was regressed into 46 past lives. In 20 of them, she was killed by the same guy. I call him Johnny. And she came to me to get over that relationship. Here's a woman who was being literally stalked and attempted murder 3 different times, and she couldn't break up with the gentleman. I use that term loosely. And she was a very well-educated, very sophisticated woman. So these are just examples. The James Leininger case that we've discussed before many times
great case.
is a good example of the World War II case where this little child in 2000 was giving spontaneous information of a World War II pilot describing the planes in detail at the age of about 3. You know, they don't talk about that on Saturday morning cartoons. You know, I mean, he has the same first name. He looked like the guy. I mean, he had infinite, or shall we say, very detailed information about the flying of a plane. That, you know, a 3-year-old kid doesn't have that. So, but today, people either believe or they don't. I don't really care. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. I'm a clinician. Yes, I have documented cases. In Grace cases, one of them is my best. But my purpose here is to use hypnosis and past life therapy as a subset of it to help people overcome the fear of death, to help them to attain goals, to cure them, or let's just say to train them to cure themselves is the better way of putting it, of various elements, everything from depression to medical issues. And but today we're going to be doing this on a kind of a historical thing here because this is cool. This is where we're going to discuss 3 ancient civilizations. Now listen to these, and I'm going to give you case histories for these 2. One is going to be the ancient civilization from the ancient continent of Lemuria, which is also known as Mu, M-U, in the Pacific Ocean, a gigantic continent.
Was that near Atlantis, or is it one of the same?
No. Lemuria is in the Pacific Ocean. I'll give you the reference points when I discuss it as far as what are the current remnants of Lemuria. So I'll get to that in a moment.
All right.
Then we're going to discuss Atlantis, of course, which was Mu's first major conquest as a civilization in expanding an empire. And then we're going to discuss Egypt before the flood. This is going to be fun, okay?
I remember when you did a sci-fi show with me many moons ago, we had a woman on that you past life regressed, and she was from Egypt, if I recall.
Yes,
you remember that?
Yeah, she was a princess, like in Egypt, and she was, and it was explaining some of her personality traits and problems that she has now. Because one of the things you learn from past life regression is there are karmic carryovers. There are traits of yours, talents as well as traits, and of course group karma, people that you know now. If it's an important or significant emotional relationship, whether it be love or hate, by the way, you're most likely going to have a karmic connection with them in a past life, or many of them. The problem is the Search for Grace case illustrates the most common situation of what we call a retribution soulmate. In other words, if you knew somebody, whether it be a wife or a husband, or whether it's a father figure or a child or an employer or a producer, okay, anyone in your life that causes you problems or whatever, you can guarantee that it's a past life connection. So my purpose is to help people get over that, not just to, sometimes I don't even recommend couples. They say, I'd like to know we know each other past life because they have problems. And I say, look, the last thing you want to see is how your husband or wife 500 years ago cheated on you, stole your money, abandoned you.
Or whatever they did.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a happy ending. If they've got problems now, which most of the people come to me have.
So they carry over, don't they?
Right. And it's going to be with the same people. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin discussing, this is something you don't hear much about. There aren't many books written about Lemuria. There are thousands of them written on Atlantis. But not Lemuria.
That's true. And let me get your website out, by the way,
Okay,
Bruce.
yeah, and also, because of your kind review of my book, I'm going to renew my offer to your listeners. If they order Exploring the Fifth Dimension directly from my site or my toll-free number, the 1-800-KARMA-4U, or 1-800-527-6248, they will get an autographed copy of the book plus a free CD called Fifth Dimensional Travel, which will take them out of the body into the fifth dimension. One of the ways you can explore past lives is going into the fifth dimension. The website is DR, that's D as in David, R as in Robert, BruceGoldberg.com. And if your listeners do not have a computer for whatever reason and they want to get the exercise without buying the book, but please, only if they don't have a computer, just call my toll-free number, and my secretary will deal with it, and just simply say, you don't have a computer, but you want the free exercise, right. And she will send you a packet with the free exercise, and the first 200 callers will get the access to the Akashic Record exercise to go along with the fifth dimensional travel. And all these exercises are on my homepage, on my site. People who have computers. There's videos on there. There's Beyond Belief clips, from your show. That's on there. And
I had fun doing that.
And so let me talk about Lemuria. Lemuria, or Mu, was a continent in the Pacific Ocean stretching 6,000 miles from east to west and about 3,000 miles north to south. This today encompasses what we would call the Hawaiian Islands, Fiji, Easter Island, the Marianas, and the South Pacific Islands we find today. So there's your reference point about where it was.
Okay.
It was a gigantic continent. It's bigger than the United States. Mu was the true Garden of Eden that produced modern man. It was the seat of a rather advanced civilization, as we'll see. The population of this ancient continent was over 64 million people, most of which perished when the gas belt underlying much of the earth collapsed on the continent, resulting in the sinking of both not only Atlantis but Mu itself. The last time was about 11,000 BC. Both these continents, by the way, went down 3 times, 50,000 BC, 26,000 BC, and the last time was 11,000 BC. So there were third time, going under for the third time. I think that's where the expression came from. Mu also had centers of what we call temples of wisdom, where people would be educated, like a university. They also had healing temples in which all citizens would be exposed to energy-level techniques, of which I use in my practice today, to heal them of various issues, medical or psychological, as we call them energy issues. Science and technology had advanced to such a stage that the average life expectancy was between 500 and 1,000 years old in Mu.
Jeez. Almost like the Bible.
Right. Well, this is like, Adam, Noah, Methuselah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Think about that, all right? And think of the time travels in the future. They're going to have a lifespan of between about 500 and 1,000, 900, as I call it. During its early phase, Mu people were between 8 and 10 feet tall. Remember the giants from the old
That's right.
Okay. Later, they evolved to be about 6 to 8 feet tall, okay, which is more relevant today, especially if you play basketball. This is reflected in, of course, the giants and many ancient legends. Their language was called Sansar, S-A-N-S-A-R, and was a symbol-based writing, not unlike the Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Hold on for a second, Bruce. We're already at the bottom. We're going to take a quick break. Go get yourself a little hot tea, rest that voice. because we're going to put you to work tonight for a couple hours. I'm George Noory, Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us right here on Coast to Coast AM's website, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. With Dr. Bruce Goldberg as we talk about past lives and ancient civilizations. And next hour, we'll take phone calls with Dr. Bruce right here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, as we talk about these ancient civilizations and their amazing past lives of what happened there. Lemuria, Mu. Let's go back to that, Bruce.
I was talking about it being more like a Garden of Eden. Now, what happened was they were established about 200,000 BC. Now, around 125,000 BC, two major groups appeared in Mu. One was, these were the beginning of the explorers, or the Maya, M-A-Y-A as it's called. One group was called the Essenes, E-S-S-E-N-E-S. They were very spiritual and functioned as a keeper of the records. They stored their records in these great crystals, by the way.
They did the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
Well, except it's a little bit different. They stored them in crystals, and remember, Atlantis was known for its crystals, as we'll discuss shortly. The other group is called the Atlantes, and they were much more of the materialistic and warlike. And notice the name Atlantes. That name would be used to establish their first major colony in about 75,000 BC, which was called Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, Mu also, when they expanded as an empire, almost like the British, the sun never sets on the British Empire routine. They expanded into Babylonia, the Mayans in North America, in Central America. Egypt was also part of the expansion. Now, Egypt is interesting because the northern part of Egypt, which we call Lower Egypt, was settled by Atlantis. The southern part of Egypt, which was called Upper Egypt, because the Nile flows from south to north, was settled by the Lemurians, or Mu. So that's important because they had a major civil war there for thousands of years. Okay, so what happened is that the India was also a major settlement of Mu, and they would ship things to people and supplies, etc., to India, and then use that India route to eventually go to Upper Egypt, the southern part of Egypt, when they established the Egyptian civilization. We're going to discuss Egypt shortly too, before the flood. So I want to give a case history for Mu. This is an interesting one. In my career of seeing over maybe 18,000 patients, totaling a lot of decades, I've only had one patient who ever had a future life as a time traveler, and this is the patient I'm going to describe.
Okay.
His future life in about the 36th century is a man named Kamar, K-A-M-A-R, and his mission was to go back in time to solve the problem of the electric wars of prehistory. Now, let me show you what this is. This is very interesting. The electric wars are a turf battle in Mu and Atlantis that lasted nearly 50 years. And whenever there were light flashes and pulsations were observed, this indicated an interdimensional interference had taken place. And many of these ETs were involved that would eventually come into our travel interdimensionally or just trying to attack the Earth and take it over. One group was called the Lyrans. The Lyrans were very selfish, power-hungry, dogmatic, and they controlled Atlantis. The other group was the Syrians, which are the good guys here, and they helped us to actually save us from the domination of the Lyrans. The Lyrans came here first by several 100,000 years, so the Syrians always had to, shall you say, play catch-up. Well, eventually, Kamar and the ETs, and some of the select ETs, were able to negotiate a peace between the Atlantes and the Essenes, as well as the ET groups. Now, the reason why the electric wars were significant was because these electric wars were based upon trying to control human beings. In other words, they had something called impulse codes. This manifested a three-dimensional distortion of reality to unsuspecting humans, even without conscious awareness or permission. This technique is coded into the memory so that past experiences can be wiped out and absolute total brainwashing scenarios could be substituted. This is beyond mere suggestions or hallucinations. It's an actual alternation of the DNA and neurological systems of the individual. So it's pretty heavy. Even the time travelers themselves, with their advanced technology, could not change that without going through the ETs and some of the other techniques. Eventually, war was ended, peace was settled, and people started to play nice again. But that was Mu. So Mu was Mu was a very interesting civilization, and really the beginning of really modern man, so to speak. And by the way, anthropologists today will tell you that Homo sapiens, our species, began 200,000 years ago. So isn't that interesting? Okay?
Well, Michael Cremo would say even farther back.
Yes, and Michael's an old friend, dear sweet guy. I love Michael. Atlantis, now, I want to discuss them.
All right.
Atlantis was the most important colony and the first major colony of Mu, but it became an uncontrollable antagonist. The Atlantes from Mu degenerated into materialistic and warlike people. The East Indian scriptures, or the Mahabharata, which I've quoted many times before, talks about a nuclear war in India, which was really an Atlantis or Lemuria fight, basically, using nuclear weapons, okay? Atlantis had these power airships called Valix, and they appeared seamless and perfectly smooth. The maximum speed was 100 miles an hour. They could be seen in the dark, and these crafts were shaped like a boat containing a ramming nose and could carry up to 100 men. A fireball-type weapon, which is described in the Mahabharata, by the way, a fireball-type weapon from this craft could destroy an entire city. That's a nuclear bomb, by the way. It was, deadly. Atlantis fought terrible wars with the Mu's colony, known as the Rama Empire in India, about 25,000 BC. And they fought all the way till about 2600 BC. The Indians had Vimanas, which they got from Mu. The Valix is the Atlantis ship. These were both very powerful airships, almost like a dogfight in World War I, kind of thing, except much more powerful. Basically, this is Atlantis. Now, Atlantis, the architectural plan of the city of Atlantis was duplicated by Carthage and Aztec cities, etc. Its design was a citadel hill encircled by zones of land and water, a canal to the sea, and bridges over the zones, fortified by towers as part of this design. This island within an island design in which docks were roofed in and the cities were encircled by three walls for protection was a tremendous defensive mode for anybody trying to attack them. The city was guarded by a great seawall, masking the entrance to the harbor, as also Carthage tried to copy that, and did for a while, but the Romans eventually beat them, of course. The pyramid was very big in Atlantis. It was not known in Mu, so the Egyptians got the pyramid design from Atlantis. Atlantis was a much greater influence to Egypt. The same thing about mummification. All those are Atlantean techniques. Now, the interesting, some of the Atlantean technology, we have printing presses. They had telepathy machines that could both read and alter thoughts. Okay, remember the electric wars of ancient Mu, etc. Guns using electricity to kill people. High-tension electric lamps that were used for the construction of Egyptian pyramids came from Atlantis. Monorail transportation systems, a generator that condensed water from the atmosphere, air conditioners. All this was involved in Atlantis.
Jeez, what great technology.
Tremendous technology, okay? I mean, even when they broke up 50,000 BC, 26, and 11,000 BC, they still had technology all the way to the end. Now, the idea of the sinking of the continents always brings upon, when I debate my colleagues, my scientific colleagues, geophysicists and astrophysics, they always whine and complain about, come on, doctor, you can't destroy a continent, you can't sink a continent. Lemuria was 6,000 miles across. Well, guess what? The gas belt theory that has been proposed, and my research from my past life regressions of many cases I've had in the ancient civilizations of Atlantis and Mu, the gas belts beneath Mu and Atlantis became compressed, split open, and had the effect of buckling the continents, arching the Pacific or the Atlantic, depending on which continent you're dealing with. Now, when they sunk, other continents had mountain ranges were forced up, like the Andes in South America, the Himalayas in Tibet area, etc. Now, today, here's an interesting. One of my colleagues, an eminent geologist at Cornell University's Thomas Gold, no relation. He came up with
he's the abiotic oil guy, right?
Well, yeah, right. Listen, this is cool. He came up with the deep Earth gas hypothesis.
That's him, yeah.
Which has been discussed in Scientific American, Omni, Science News, and many other publications, as well as geological journals. So he's very well respected. Gold believes that, now listen to this. He's an oil guy, but listen to what he says. He believes that this natural methane gas that was part of this gas belt originates more from these gas belts than fossil fuel from dinosaurs and plants. In other words, he's saying that this natural methane
That's right.
was the reason for not only the breaking up of Atlantis and Lemuria, sinking them, but also from the idea of where we get our oil from. You know, so OPEC and all these people thank the methane for this.
That's right. I believe that theory too, because many times an oil well, Bruce, has gone dry and it fills right back up again.
Right, and it shouldn't do that. How many dinosaurs could there have been? I mean, think of that. It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk a little bit about ancient Atlantis. Now, I'm going to describe a case that occurred before the flood. This is 16,000 BC. One of my female patients, her name, I call her Joan, not her real name. She described the past life, and she lived in Tibet about 16,000 BC. Remember, India and that area was a major colony of
Huge.
Mu. Okay?
Yeah.
Her name was Adi, A-D-I, and she was the only daughter of an Indian priest named Deru. Deru was over 500 years old, while Adi's age was about 350. Deru originally came from Mu and was one of the Essenes that we talked about, very spiritual, cool people. Okay, they established colonies in Tibet, India, and Myanmar, which used to be Burma. Adi was born in Mu, but lived in the motherland only for about the first 300 years of her life, and then she came with her father to Egypt eventually through India and Tibet. Okay, so what happened is that by this time, 16,000 BC, Mu had lost much of its spiritual base. The Essenes were dominated by the Atlantes. It was ripe for destruction and attacked by Atlantis repeatedly, especially in Egypt, where the Atlantean northern part of the country was much greater in military might than the southern part. So Adi and her father was trying to assist in spiritual development of the new Egyptian colony, but, it was an uphill battle. Upon the arrival in Egypt, Adi, Deru, and other priests began their missionary work. But what was interesting, there was one gentleman from Lower Egypt, which is the northern part, a man they called, now listen to the name, Tatos. Remember the first time traveler?
Yeah.
This is him. This white, blue-eyed, blonde, tall Atlantean had all the physical appearance and spirituality of a movie in the scene, but he was an Atlantean. Actually, he went back in time from the 31st century to Atlantis to try to calm down the Atlantic. This is part of the time travel mission, if you will. Okay, so he helped keep the peace, because what would happen is the local civilization that were not humans, not ETs or anybody else, they were killing each other and killing off a lot of the Atlantis and the Lemurs or the Lemurians. So it was really difficult. Anyway, she does her work, and she stays there for many years, and she never marries, was totally dedicated to the missionary avocation, and she died at the age of about 435, while her father lived to be about 600 years old. Now, there were no megaliths during Adi's stay in Upper Egypt, which was 16,000 BC. Okay, get the hint here? So let's talk about the pyramids now. We talked about the healing temples, which, by the way, were in Egypt too, and Atlantis, Lemuria both had those healing temples, and temples of learning were always in Belgium.
And when you say healing temples, people would go there to physically heal?
Right. They use energy techniques. They use some of them had laser rays, so to speak, like a laser beam kind of thing we would call laser surgery today. Others would use spiritual techniques like hypnosis. Now, when I developed my superconscious mind tap, I didn't know it at the time, but as years went by, and decades in my case went by, I realized that I'm using the same techniques they use in the healing temples. I've made it westernized, but the superconscious mind tap was actually done on a certain way back, in ancient Atlantis and Lemuria. So what happened is that Egypt eventually became unified around 3100 BC, and the presence of the Lemurians and Atlantes died off by 11,000 BC when Atlantis sunk and Lemuria sunk.
But did any of them make it to Egypt?
A lot of them, yes. Some of them did escape. They escaped not just to Egypt, but also to ancient Greece and other European colonies, to England, to Central America, the Mayan civilization. Anytime you have an advance, and some to China, anytime you have an advanced civilization that came out of nowhere, like Egypt, you can guarantee there was a Atlantean or Movian involvement.
Or E.T.
Well,
I used to think.
Yes, but remember, as I discussed many times in my time travel books, the time travelers had the anti-gravity flying crafts, which were much more relevant in construction of the pyramids than was any ET device. Now, what happened is by 10,500 BC...
How are you holding up, by the way?
Oh, I'm okay.
Okay.
By 10,500 BC, which is about 500 years after the sinking of Atlantis Lemuria, the Sphinx was actually completed by that time. The pyramids of Giza were only partially constructed, maybe a third. So you can see that the estimates of, 4,500 years for the Egyptian Sphinx and the Pyramid of Giza, et cetera, are all wrong by thousands of years.
Bruce, have you been able to use past life regression to find out how in the heck the pyramids were made? I mean, were there any witnesses to that?
Yeah, in one of the books you were kind enough to put on your site, Past Life, Future Lives Revealed, I describe a case in ancient Egypt where the construction was being done as far as the beginning phases of the Pyramid of Giza, the Giza Plateau, the three pyramids there. Now, in my Time Travelers from Our Future book, which is also noted on your site, that book, I give the intimate details of how the construction, not just of the pyramids of Giza, but also megaliths around the world, Easter Island, in England, all throughout Europe. They use these anti-gravity flying crafts, which I've discussed many times. So the book, of course, details that with pictures of it and all the. It's very technical, and I'm not trying to bore people with all the aspects. But let's just say they use anti-gravity, a big mothership that had anti-gravity, and then these 9 foot in length and hovering above the earth by about maybe a dozen feet or so, with anti-gravity generators that would lift these thousands and thousands of tons rocks. Nobody could ever figure out how they did that. Now, I've read the theories, and they say, they do that. And, Japan tried to do that in 1979 with old equipment. They wanted to simulate ancient Egypt. They failed. Then they tried using modern-day equipment, big tractors and stuff. They still couldn't do it, okay? So what does that tell you? It tells you that they did something. It had to be anti-gravity. And look at the Pyramid of Giza. It's so accurate. It's like within a quarter of an inch. Perfectly designed, north to south. It symbolizes the radius of the circumference of the Earth. If you read in my Egypt book, I talk about all the details about how brilliant that design was and how people today could not possibly do that. So what we learned from antiquity, is that the farther you go back in history, the more advanced civilizations become, which is the opposite of logic. If you go back to, if you study in school about the Dark Ages, now when you and I were in school, and you study European history, the Dark Ages would be after the fall of Rome, right? 476 to about the Middle Ages was probably Charlemagne, 800 A.D. But there was a bigger Dark Ages that nobody discusses unless you read scholarly books, as I do, and that was after the Battle of Troy, about 1200 B.C., which is a real battle, and we know by von Schliemann's discovery. The ancient Greeks, they had writing, and after the Battle of Troy, let's say 1100 plus B.C., to 750 B.C., they lost the idea of writing. There was no writing for 450 years, or 350 years. And then all of a sudden they developed the Mycenae A and B, and they got writing again. And then a couple of hundred years later, they had the Golden Age of Greece with the greatest minds in history. So what does that tell you? What's the odds of that happening?
Exactly. And it just doesn't pop up like that.
Everybody has help, okay? And the more you go back in time, this is like the movie Planet of the Apes, the original one, The farther you go back in time.
With the classic ending.
Well, yeah, but forget it. I don't want to ruin that if they haven't seen it. But the point is, when the archaeologists were going back there, they were discovering Taylor, played by Charlton Heston. That as you went back in time, the apes were actually preceded by humans, and not the other way around. Okay, and at least for that period of time, where humans controlled the earth, and they humans were moot, and they were just like slaves. And so that is not logical. And the Egyptian civilization, if you study more modern history of Egypt, meaning from the first pharaohs, 3100 BC, Egypt came out of nowhere, which is archaeologically impossible. You've got to have little cultures and gradual, technology or farming and other things, and it came out of nowhere, which has never happened in history before. So, if you look at the time travelers, their first missions were in ancient Egypt with Tatos, Geb, Isis, Osiris, and Horus. What does that tell you, okay? Those are the gods of Egypt, and those were time travelers.
Hold on for a second, Bruce. We're at the top of the hour. Just rest that voice for a little bit. We're going to come back and talk more about these ancient civilizations, and we will take phone calls. People want to know about reincarnation. Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us. Past lives, past civilizations. Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us tonight on Coast to Coast, and we will take your phone calls this hour with him next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you with Dr. Bruce Goldberg. We'll take your calls as well as we talk about the incredible ancient civilizations through past lives and regressions of Lemuria, of course, Atlantis and Egypt. Bruce, and you were wrapping up Egypt. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm just saying is that Egypt is a good testimonial to the fact that we've had a lot of help and advanced, shall we say, expertise and advice and consult in our development of technology. Because why didn't the ancient Greeks come up with satellite dishes and television and radio? They had some of the greatest minds in the world's history living there at the time, not just philosophers. But by the way, so Egypt is important to us as far as it's the beginning of monarchies. We get, in ancient Egypt, women had community property rights. No ancient civilization ever did that except for Egypt. So we get a lot of stuff from Egypt, which is very important. But I want to make a comment. I've been getting a lot of emails from your listeners. They're asking about my health. And just for your listeners' benefit, I really feel great. I have my usual George knows my energy level.
Yeah.
I'm just having a strained voice because
you've got a head cold.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a cold for a few days, and unfortunately it settles into the throats. But this will be gone tomorrow. By the way, they asked me about it. I said, yes, I can do computer sessions. I'm still going to be seeing patients tomorrow. They wanted to know about if people want to see me for my therapy, they can always do Skype or FaceTime sessions, and my homepage has all the information about that as far as how to do that very simply. And they wanted me to repeat my offer again. They were confused. If they order the Exploring the Fifth Dimension book, the one you were kind enough to review, through my site or the toll-free number, the 800-KARMA-4U or 800-527-6248, or my site online, they get a free fifth dimensional travel CD, which will take them out of the body into the fifth dimension. Now, if they want, but they have to order the book to get that. And if they want to get just a written exercise, they can call the toll-free number, which is 1-800-527-6248 or 1-800-KARMA, the number 4 and the letter U. But please do not call that if you have a computer. Everything is on the site. In fact, a lot more. But if you don't have a computer, you'll get a free written exercise, fifth dimensional travel, and the first 200 callers will get the access to the Akashic Records exercise also. There's also videos on my site, not just a clip from Beyond Belief, but the actual regressions, progressions. There's a time traveler contactee on there. There's ET contactees on there. There's a case where I removed a psychic attack on television live years ago in San Diego. A lot of fun stuff, and also articles. So, and the last thing is that there are audio books. 18 of my 21 books are in audio books, and they're available on Amazon Audible. So if they want to listen to me while driving in the car with a better voice than I have tonight, it's not a problem. But one last thing
better voice.
I want to bring up, since we're talking about ancient civilizations, I ran across this, and I don't know whether you saw this. There was an online thing it's called the Greek statue with the laptop. Have you heard about this?
No.
Oh, this is cool. This is, if they just Google the Greek statue with the laptop, you will see a picture of an ancient Greek woman. Actually, it looks like she's handing, an object to a young girl. And statue pictures? Yeah, it's sort of like a carving. It's like a carving.
All right.
It's not a freestanding thing. And it looks like a laptop complete with USB ports. And the statue is called Grave Noskos of the Enthroned Woman with the Attendant. And it's in the J. Paul Getty Museum here in Malibu, California. So if you look at this thing, it's really cool. It's it gives you a time traveler reference like you wouldn't believe, and but it's very interesting. I'm surprised you haven't heard about it, but it's just cool. It's very nice.
Bruce, we'll get to your calls here in a second. Do most young people have better recollections of past lives than adults?
Well, yes. The work of Ian Stevenson, who died a few years ago, but he was 50 years of research. He showed that if you take a child, now this is for the parents out there, if you got a child, male or female, between the ages of 2 and 5, and you just ask him, don't make like you're playing a game with him, don't play with him as far as, don't try to be disrespectful, but and this is for the mothers mostly, you just ask him, say to them, tell me what it was like when you were big. That's all you have to say to them.
Yeah.
Most of the time, nothing will happen, but sometimes the kid will start reporting a detail, at least information about a past life with information they're not used to being exposed to, and vocabulary. I mean, the James Leininger case that we talked about several times is a perfect example of that. That was a spontaneous past life recall. So if they want to do it for me, though, and that's another question I'm getting, I do have my Hypnotic Time Travel CD album, which gives you into past life regression, future life progression, superconscious mind taps, soul plane ascension, out-of-body experiences. So if you want to do as you might say, the Akashic record scan of your life, like I did with your two future lives of Dexter, Monterey, and Zior.
Yeah.
I did that by using a Akashic record scan, but you can do that by using the Hypnotic Time Travel album. And it's very simple, easy to use, and the point is we've all had, this is another thing they've asked me, your listeners, several of them. The average person out there, nothing fancy, not a metaphysical guru, the average human being walking the earth has had over 1,000 past lives.
Wow. I had on last week Kathy Bird, whose little boy, and they're convinced that he was and is the reincarnated Lou Gehrig, the baseball player.
Interesting.
Fascinating. Let's take some calls here for you, Bruce. They're lining up. Let's go to Steve in Royal Oak, Michigan, east of the Rockies. Hi, Steve. Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hi there, Mr. Noory and Mr. Goldberg. Good morning.
Hi there.
Hey, here's my situation. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I've been a believer in reincarnation for a long time.
Okay.
I've been dating this gal, on again, off again. I've known her in this life for about 17 years. We had a little division of consciousness. I don't know how to put it.
Your phone's breaking up. I'm going to have Tom fix it, and we'll see if we can get you back on again.
Well, it sounds like he was going to illustrate one of the potential retribution soulmate lifetimes where if he's having problems with his girlfriend now, or I don't know if his wife or his girlfriend, those issues undoubtedly would have reappeared or appeared initially in past lives. And you can actually work these out. You can do things like astral negotiation, which I've discussed about using the out-of-body experience to work out difficulties with people on the earth plane now that might be very difficult, but when you're out of the body and they're out of the body, they're much more negotiable, so to speak. Summer
in Panama Beach, Florida. Hi, Summer. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just curious how reincarnation relates to Scripture, and I mean, as far as religion, is it if you believe in reincarnation, can you still be a religious person and believe in Christ?
Okay, that's a great question. I always get this. It's always a controversial one, but let me give you the facts. Facts are strange things. They're facts. The early Christian church was a great believer in reincarnation. We don't have the original Old Testament or New Testament. The oldest Old Testament is the Aleppo Codex, which is 1000 A.D., which is about 2,300 years after the fact. The oldest version of the New Testament in the Vatican is about the 5th century, which is about 300 years after it was written, 70 to 110 A.D. Now, here's let me show you my example. There is no problem with reincarnation being a problem with the Christian religion or any religion, actually. If you ask you a question, and this is for you, George, who do you think is the number one Christian writer of all time?
Christian writer?
Yeah, writer. Who wrote most? They wrote little documents and like articles, what we would call them.
I would say the apostles were.
Well, actually, no. It was St. Thomas Aquinas would be the number one guy in volume. Okay?
All right.
So who's the number two guy? Nobody knows who number two is.
I have no idea.
Number two is a man named Origen, Origen. He lived from the late 2nd to the early 3rd century A.D., mostly in Alexandria, Egypt. He was 18. He was a priest. He was 18 when he got his first diocese. I mean, how's that? Okay, this is like a Bryce Harper, for religion. Anyway, he wrote tons of things about reincarnation. There's a document called, or a writing called Contra Celsum, which is in my Past Lives, Future Lives book, which I give you just some quotes from his work. The early Christian fathers, they would go into the desert to meditate, so meditation isn't a no-no, and that includes hypnosis. They were all, not all, but many of them were reincarnationists. So the reason why reincarnation was taken out of the Bible was the editing of Emperor Justinian, a secular dude who hated everyone, and his wife, was the Evita Peron of her day, Theodora. And they ordered the Pope to take the reincarnation references out. He refused. They shackled the Pope. He died in torture, and they did their editing for the 5th time, the 5th Ecumenical Council of 553 A.D. in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So this has been fudged, copied, edited, whatever. There's no problem with the belief in reincarnation. Even the Pope acknowledges that, ETs have souls, okay?
Oh, yeah. It's big stuff now.
By the way, that kid you talked about who's the reincarnation of Lou Gehrig,
yep.
The Yankees are in spring training now, and they could use him.
They probably could. Let's go back to Steve in Royal Oak, Michigan. Tom says he's got a better connection. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah. 21st century magic called cell phones aren't that good,
Exactly.
Okay. Hey, here's the deal. I've known this gal for like 17 years, okay, on again, off again. We've had our differences, but I'm a believer in reincarnation. She's kind of come around. She still wants me to be around, but about 4 years, she hooked up with this guy, and no offense, he's a car salesman, okay? So, anyways, I'm still around, and it's like, I know it's a past life, like you said, Mr. Goldberg, retribution. How do I handle this?
It sounds like you're carrying a torch for her, which is more in the obsessive disorder, as we call this. And don't forget, the car salesman may have sold her a chariot in a past life. I mean, there could be a connection there, too. But I would recommend that you do a superconscious mind tap. We can do that by computer to cleanse away. If this relationship is going nowhere, you want to move on with your life.
Yep, exactly.
You don't want to be carrying a torch, because you will be nothing but depressed, bereaved, and you're going to think of all the good times you've had and now have none of those. So I would suggest that you move on. If she's going to deal with this guy, free will. She can do whatever she wants. And you can also do what you want. And I always recommend people, if the relationship is a no-go, then just move on with your life, and you can do it. It sounds easy, but again, you're using energy techniques originated in ancient Lemuria that I've updated. You can actually remove any kind of bereavement. This applies to people who've lost loved ones, too. We talked about, if you lose pets or loved ones in your family, you can use these techniques of out-of-body experiences and travel into the fifth dimension to become, and what's the term? Ultra-terrestrial, when you travel into the fifth dimension. And you can actually resolve these things. So I just want to tell you that I understand where you're coming from. I work with lots of cases of this, relationship issues. America has the highest divorce rate in the world, and we have some of the most dysfunctional relationships of any country ever. But you can move on, and wish her the best. Don't be nasty about it, and don't go after the car salesman either. Just move on with your life, and that can be done.
Were they all related and interconnected in a past life, Bruce?
Was who interconnected?
These three.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know. I have to do the regressions to see what's going on. I can tell you him and the girl were definitely related in past lives or had past lives together. The car salesman could just be representing a principle of whether she cheated on him or just, a low attention span or just being more promiscuous. He could just be an innocent bystander.
Sure. But like you said, could have sold her a chariot.
Right, yes.
A long time ago. Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us here. Let's go to Jeff in Victoria, British Columbia, out there in Canada. Hey, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, George. Good to talk to you, man.
Hey, I'm glad you got through. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, I was just going to say, all this stuff about, the how they built the pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've got a theory on it, and I think the topography was completely different, 5,000 years ago.
Maybe. Explain that, though.
It doesn't matter, though, because you're talking about 70-ton rocks. I don't care if the topography was based upon Jell-O, okay? How do you move these rocks to 1/4 of an inch in accuracy that we today, with modern equipment, cannot even come close to duplicating? So you may be able to move the rocks from the quarries to the Giza Plateau. I have a problem with that, too, but it can be done. But placing them that way, and don't forget, this is
And stacking them?
Yeah, it's 387 feet high, the Pyramid of Giza, whatever. I mean, as Donald Trump would say, give me a break, okay?
Levitation, Bruce, or something, sound resonance.
Levitation, good term, George, really good. That's why I love talking with you. Levitation is the beginning phase of teleportation, and it's also an anti-gravity approach, isn't it?
Absolutely. They probably knew the secrets of magnetism. It kind of maybe floated them.
Magnetism is part of that, but the biggest part, of course, is anti-gravity.
Well, that could be, too. Bruce, of all the types of reincarnation and past lives that you have done, in the thousands and thousands, is there one that really stands out as the most surprising or shocking that occurred with you?
Well, the search for Grace case was always the most outstanding one because not only because it was documented, but it's not really easy, logical to see a woman that I call her not her real name in this life, a young, beautiful woman in her mid-20s, professionally trained, gorgeous, just having her whole life in front of her, smart as you can imagine, being attracted to and not being able to break up a relationship with a guy who's not only a creep and a married guy cheating on his wife and all the other stuff, he's also involved with drugs and you name it.
Oh,
but he tried to murder her on 3 different occasions. And I had one of my appointments with her, one of my sessions, right after her last attack in which she had black and blue marks. I don't even know how she got on a plane to come to my office in the East Coast in those days. And so that to me is always an outstanding one. But I'll tell you what was a really nice one was when I worked with Jerry Springer. When I did his show, I took him into a past life in the green room prior to the show, and he was an English, like a cop, basically, a knight, but he was saving a damsel in distress, so to speak, with a bunch of his fellow swordsmen, but they were outnumbered. So they got into a battle, and he lost the battle, almost died, didn't. And the woman that he was saving, trying to save, and eventually did save her life, she took him into the local castle, extended his life, and she eventually was his current life daughter, Christy. So here you have karmic family values that I found I didn't expect that at all. Another thing, I was on the Jenny Jones show, and I did a regression of a woman, this inner city woman from Chicago. She was black, and I'll show you why that's relevant in a moment. And she went to ancient Greece, and she described herself with blonde hair, green eyes, Caucasian, which she didn't expect because she didn't know anything about reincarnation. She thought she'd always be a dark-skinned race, which, of course, is not true. And when she was describing the past life, she was doing it from an out-of-body experience.
That's unique.
Yes, it is it's not common, okay? It happens, but so when I asked her, she goes, I'm above the earth. And when Jenny was questioning her, trying to actually, she was trying to knock down the regression because that's what she does. She goes, you were what? And she goes, I was above the earth, yes. This was an OBE. I didn't train her to do that. I never saw her before. She had no experience with hypnosis. So it's a really interesting life because, A, she didn't expect to be Caucasian. B, she was doing it from about 100 feet in the air and perfectly safe. And so I thought that those are two of my favorite regressions. But, most regressions, just not trying to throw cold water on us for the audience, most regressions are very boring. People are dirt farmers dying from tuberculosis.
Not everybody's Cleopatra or some pharaoh or whatever. Right.
And you're not going to be a swashbuckler. If you do the research, 98% of the population of this planet historically were poor, were poverty.
Sure, absolutely.
So if you're trying to be some really cool dude, no, and you're not going to be a king. Very, very rarely. Because what you did in past lives, if you're middle class now, you're unlikely to be higher upper class like kings or queens or leaders or whatever in past lives. You're most likely going to be somebody in probably lower class. They didn't have many middle class people in those days. So most past lives will disappoint people as far as interest. But what it does do, not only does it give them cocktail party information they can entertain their friends with and family, it overcomes the fear of death. That is the biggie right there.
Let's talk about that, Bruce, when we come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast AM with Dr. Bruce Goldberg, and we'll take final calls. We're going to be back in a moment with final phone calls with Dr. Bruce Goldberg as we talk about ancient civilizations and past lives. Those scary sound effects. I had a friend who died in a train car accident. He was in his pickup truck, John Cisna, Springfield, Illinois. I don't know what happened. It was late at night, and bang, he got smacked. Sad. Dr. Bruce Goldberg with us. We're going to get to your phone calls. Bruce, these past lives that are out there, how many do we have?
Well, you have as many as you need. The fact that we had literally 1,000 per person on the average is not a good sign. You're supposed to have 2 past lives. You're supposed to have a child, a mother, and a father, technically. And the problem is when people have lives, they do stupid things, they add karmic debts, and the beat goes on. It's like not paying your mortgage and having interest added on.
Sure.
So don't worry about the number of past lives. You can actually cut the system by using techniques like my superconscious mind tap and healing techniques. You can actually train yourself to do, or be trained to do what I call ascension techniques, which is what I focus in my practice on a regular basis. And ascension techniques helps purify the soul, so to speak, so that you don't have to come back anymore. Once you connect with your higher self and merge with it at the moment of death, which I call a conscious out-of-body experience, then you're done. You could then go to the higher upper planes, and we call them the higher planes, and rejoin the God energy complex. So for the woman who called earlier about the religious problems with reincarnation, there really isn't, unless you want to label it and make one up. As a firm believer in the God energy complex, most reincarnationists I know are. It's the scientists that are the atheists, not the metaphysical reincarnationists.
That's so true. Let's go to final calls here. Keith in St. Louis. Hey, Keith, did it rain out there tonight? My kids got a little worried for them.
Yeah, a little...
Nothing big.
Hail.
A little hail, yeah. That's all we need.
I was noticing there's quite a few similarities between Mr. Goldberg and Mr. Mars's talk with Mr. Church on the battle going on in South Pole and the giant humanoids that they found down there, and the fact that there's 3 oval ships. It's part of that thing, and these lizard men that the military supposedly fighting.
Strange stuff down there.
And don't forget, there were rumors that Hitler supposedly had a base down in Antarctica, and with an ET connection. That was discovered years ago when some of the files were revolved. So we don't know the accuracy of that. But the lizard men you're talking about are the reptilians. And there's you don't hear much about them because they're cannibalistic, but apparently they're in underground bases in places like Taos, New Mexico, and some of the other places, some think Colorado, the old Denver airport, let's not forget that one. So they have been reported too many times to be a mere coincidence or somebody's hallucination.
Bruce says, as you have looked at so many past lives, what about future lives? I know you did one for me. Do you see many future lives?
Yeah, well, I have taken people as far forward as the 50th century, so that's
50?
3,000 years from now. And when I work with my time traveler books, I have 2 books on time travelers. I talk about the technology. So I have done that myself as far as I myself have seen the future, as well as going all the way up until at least the 35th century. But my patients have reported all the way up to the 50th, which means that there's going to be no nuclear wars or nothing's going to happen to this planet to cause problems until at least the year 5000 AD. Okay? So the future is fun because not only is the technology brilliant, but also the life expectancy is between 500 and 900 years old. People don't work very much. They work 15 hours a week. They have a relaxing life. They're tall, slender, no weight problems, no cancer, no AIDS, no diabetes. It's really almost like the Garden of Eden in a way. Not quite, but it's a whole lot better than what we have today.
We've got Bonnie in Denver, Colorado. Hello, Bonnie. You're on with Dr. Bruce Goldberg.
Hi, Dr. Goldberg. Well, I heard you mention about that Greek statue that's dated 100 BC, and yet it looks like she's looking at a laptop, and I just had to take a look at that. So I just opened up my cell phone and found the picture, and it is hysterical. It really does look like a laptop. That was amazing. But what I was wondering is I noticed the way she's leaning against her chair, it breaks the back of the chair into 2 crosses.
Yes, right.
And
yes.
It's 100 BC. Has anybody been talking about that?
Well, not that I'm aware of, but what's important is that the laptop has 2 USB ports that you can clearly see from this young child on her right hand. And she's in what they call a lounging position, which is very common in ancient Greece. When they would have their dinners, they would go to, that's where we get the term lounge from. They would be in like a lounging position or like a relaxing position. The way they describe it, though, is just, I mean, you can't look at that and not see a computer, a laptop, or a laptop with 2 USB ports. And this is 100 BC is, over 2,100 years ago. So what does that tell you? Okay, and I don't think when they did the sculpture, they were trying to impress people on George's show with this. Okay.
All right, thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate your calling.
Thank you for looking it up, though, I recommend it to your listeners. Just type in the Greek statue with the laptop in Google, and you'll get it.
So, what are your next projects, Bruce? What are you going to work on?
Well, I've been working on this for a while. I'm working on another book in reference to Visionaries of the Future is the name of it. In reference, I'm going to talk about a lot of seers, a lot of Nostradamuses and people like that, and throw my work in there at the end of it. So I'm thinking of that, and I'm also thinking of doing some other projects in reference to the workshops, and I'll announce those things on my site. But my most important projects are related to Coast to Coast AM and you. So
let's go to Paul in Seattle, Washington, west of the Rockies. Hello, Paul. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks again, George, for taking my call
Sure
here.
thing.
I'm an open-minded person, and no offense to Dr. Goldberg, but you talk a lot. You talk really quick. Now, I'm one for reincarnation, but you say it's fact. You were telling the other caller facts. There's really no way you can prove these facts.
No, you miss it.
Oh, no, wait, just 1 minute, sir. I just want to say that I have a question, and then I want to ask George something. Who made these people to begin with to have all these past lives? And George, I think my past life was a guy who went, well, God bless you and Tommy, and I got my Patriots applied. You need to get Glenn back on the show.
That was you.
When I said facts, I was referring to something else. I said reincarnation cannot be proven or disproven. You can only give suggestive evidence. That's the term that I use, which is a way of saying it's not proven. It's a theory, not a law, but it's very close.
The process of past lives, who controls them when you're on the other side?
Oh, well, that's between your higher self and your spirit guides, which can be departed relatives, loved ones, but your higher self controls everything. When people try to access the Akashic records, and do things like that, or they want to see the future, or they want to do any kind of healing, it's always the higher self that's your advisor, and sometimes your censor. Sometimes the higher self won't give you information because you're not spiritually ready for it yet. So the higher self, the perfect part of your soul, which is creative energy, which means it's got no limitations. It can cure cancer. It can cure AIDS. It can cure lupus. It can cure a relationship problem like that caller who called earlier with the used car salesman stealing his girlfriend, You can do anything, and you will do anything with the higher self. Now, when you're out of the body in between lives and choosing your next life, it's your higher self that makes you. It doesn't force you. It just gives you advice. You can always reject the higher self, and people do all the time. Not a good idea, by the way. But that's why people make so many problems, why they reincarnate and they realize, well, how do you think infant death syndrome comes about? Medicine, I'm medically trained. Infant death syndrome doesn't fit into any category. Infants shouldn't just die. And I think what that is somebody reincarnates. They're about maybe 6 days old, and they realize they made a mistake, and they leave by dying so they can do it again.
And by the way, nothing wrong with being a used car salesman. At all. Some of those guys make a lot of money, by the way.
And today's market's very different because in today's market, I have used car salesmen as patients. They don't play the games they used to because of the online competition. So they're basically trying to make money, but they're actually, now there are exceptions, but the ones I've known, they're pretty straight because you don't need to do them. You can just go online.
That's right. Now, if they come out in a plaid jacket, run the other way.
And a bad toupee.
Let's go to Trent in Fairbanks, Alaska, first-time caller. Hi, Trent. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing?
Great, Trent. Thank you.
Hey, thanks to be on. I've been wanting to call for a very long time, actually since 1997.
Wow.
In fact, I just held back because of this past life things I keep hearing it's coming up. And I've been listening to the radio station since probably the early 90s, actually. So But
well, thanks for your devotion.
As far as the past life,
you may have heard my first interview back in 1994 with Art, if you're an old-time listener. So
yep, exactly.
What's on your mind?
And I've become a believer, and my wife at the time, and back in 1997, was having a dream in the middle of the night, and I just happened to be awake, and she was speaking a different language. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And back then, I got an old video camera back then. It's like, well, what the heck? Why not video it, so I can have proof of this? And she kept speaking in Native American tongue. I'm like, I didn't understand a word. And I spoke back and said, speak English. And then she spoke back in English, but with that accent of the Native American tongue. And I asked questions and went back and forth.
We call that xenoglossy with an X.
God, Bruce, your voice is almost gone.
Okay. We call that xenoglossy. And I've had a 5-year-old child in hypnosis, German background, and I think Bulgarian background. And he spoke a fluent medieval German, he was British and Scottish background, not German. He spoke a medieval German dialect. I speak a little German because of my college days. And I had a language expert from local university, and he confirmed and spoke fluently with the child who had never studied German or any other language other than English. And he was speaking it fluently, can answer questions, and that is responsive xenoglossy, we call that. And I don't know how you're going to explain that, because he doesn't get that from watching cartoons.
No, he does not. That's absolutely true. In some of these cases, too, like the little Lou Gehrig kid, he never saw films of Lou Gehrig. He didn't even know who he was, but he sure learned very darn fast.
Well, it's interesting. If he becomes a baseball player, that would make it even,
He's playing baseball now.
Oh, is he really?
I think he's 11 years old, and he's playing.
Okay, well, let's see.
It's pretty good, too.
No, I love hearing stories like that, because to me, it's rare that you have a celebrity reincarnate like that. But if they do happen, they have future lives too. So don't knock them because they're a celebrity, and whatever field they're in, they will come back.
I wonder what you're coming back as.
Well, I don't discuss that. I've done 2 of my future lives, and I've done 13 of my own past
You've done
lives.
your own, okay.
Yes, but I don't discuss them because I want to be able to test people who claim to be past life readers. So if I discuss them publicly, then I lose my control issue there.
Okay, let's go to Virginia. No Tie, Oregon. Go ahead, Virginia.
Hi. Ever since I was very young, when I lay down at night to go to sleep, above me I hear what sounds like hundreds of people murmuring, and I hear music.
What kind of music?
Just like waltz type of music, real mellow, old music.
Like they played on the Titanic as it was sinking.
I do, yeah.
You could be dealing with it.
I've often wondered, am I just connecting and hearing the other side? Once in a while I'll hear my name or I'll make out a specific word, but I've never actually been able to really hear what they're saying.
Well, what's happening to her?
You could be experiencing a spirit guide contact, and that's why your name is used. The other option is that you could be scanning into a past life, maybe in Vienna 100 years ago or something like that, but they wouldn't call you by your current life name. So if they're calling you by your current life name, I would assume it's more of a spirit guide contact, and they can be noisy, but if you're getting information that's very specific that you recall, it's going to be very valuable. You never want to ignore information coming from spirit guides or your higher self.
Bruce, do these reincarnated lives, do you eventually stop at a certain point?
Well, you don't have to stop. You can do this forever. It's not a good concept, but it stops when you perfect the soul. When you merge with your higher self at the moment of death, we call that a COBE, which is a conscious out-of-body experience. And then you ascend, go to the soul plane where you normally choose your next life. Instead of choosing another life, you go to the soul plane with your higher self there. Now you merge together, and then you ascend into the higher planes to rejoin the God energy complex. I give the complete detailed mechanism of that in my Ascension book. It's very well, I'm not the only one who's come up with this, but the whole point of being here is not just to have a nice fancy house, and that's all fine. It's really to get out of this dimension and to get out of the karmic cycle, which is the lower 5 planes, as we call it, and to rejoin the God energy complex eventually. That is the ultimate. And music, by the way, is symbolic of the higher planes, interesting enough. Not what she was describing, but every dimension has its own sound classification. We'll go into that more next time when I do a show on parallel universes and out-of-body experiences. But it's always good to meet good fifth-dimensional entities that are there for your support. And when you travel into the fifth dimension, remember the term, you become an ultra-terrestrial.
Ultra. Let's go to our final caller here, David, truck driving in Texas. Hi, David. Let's get you in here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing.
Appreciate it. I wanted to mention this reincarnation. That's all over in the Bible. People, we're just not listening when we're hearing the Father talk about it. Each time he's talking about sending us back into captivity for our disobedience.
That's what he meant.
That's our souls. We're transferring from one life to another life, and we're going back into captivity. But there's a day he's going to bring that captivity. He's no longer going to send us into the captivity. That's the end of the world that Jesus talks about.
Well, there are several quotes in my Past Lives, Future Lives book to show that. One of them deals with Jesus talking about Elijah, the prophet from ancient Israel, how he thinks he was the reincarnation, at least his body was, of the prophet Elijah. Very specific quote. You can't interpret any other way. So, yes, you understand it's not that. It's the preachers, it's the ministers, it's the priests who try to, with all due respect, they're welcome to their First Amendment rights, but they tend to brainwash their parishioners because, the reason why Justinian didn't like reincarnation was because he felt that people believed in reincarnation, they wouldn't do anything. They would just say, I'll do it in my next life. They would just, be slackers, as they say in England. I have a problem with that, of course, but yes, people do procrastinate, but reincarnation is real. There's just too many documented cases, and there's too much logic. Do you think we just came here for one time? Maybe you die when you're 2 years old, and that's it?
Bruce, I'm going to give out your website and your phone number to preserve your voice. It's Dr. Bruce Goldberg, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. His toll-free number, 1-800-KARMA with a K, KARMA for you, the number 4, 1-800-KARMA for you. And by the way, Lex has just tweeted the picture of that statue with that woman holding the laptop about a zillion years ago. Go take a look at that. Up next, the ghosts of... Oh, was that Johnny Cash we just heard? Sure was. And in a moment, ghosts of country music, tales of haunted honky-tonks and legendary specters. Next, with Matthew Swain on Coast to Coast AM. Matthew Swain back with us, journalist who currently works as a research writer at Penn State. Matt has worked as a reporter, music reviewer for several newspapers and online outlets such as centerdaily.com, music.com, a regular contributor to the revised version of Omni magazine called Omni Reboot. He writes for Antimatter columns, and here he is back on Coast to Coast with his book, Ghosts of Country Music. Hey, Matthew, good work. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real honor.
You were with us almost 2.5 years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, I was with Haunted Rock and Roll.
That's right. Absolutely. How did you get involved in the music end of this? Fascinating.
Well, it's kind of been a long trail, but it starts at birth, believe it or not. I was born on Halloween, so I learned to embrace my weirdness pretty early on. I always loved ghost stories and horror movies and sci-fi, so the interest was always there. And then I started to write about the supernatural and ghosts as a newspaper reporter. If you're a Halloween baby and Halloween comes up, your editor's going to want a really good Halloween story.
That's
so
right.
I decided to do a story on local ghost lore. I became fascinated with that. I became fascinated with university ghost stories, which led to my first book, America's Haunted Universities. And then coming off that, I decided I would couple my love of music history and music. I was a DJ for years, so I decided to couple that with the supernatural, and that led to Haunted Rock and Roll. And I had a bunch of friends tell me, okay, now you have to do one about country music. So I ended up researching that and finding material for Ghosts of Country Music.
Super. Now, let's talk about that for a moment, the ghosts of country music. What do you mean by that?
So, the ghosts of country music is what I found, and if I can back this up just a little bit.
Absolutely.
When I looked into haunted rock and roll, I had a few sources. I had Gary Patterson's book.
Great guy, by the way.
Yeah, and an amazing book that he wrote, Take a Walk on the Dark Side. And I also had just, some, talking to people about rock and roll, you do get a kind of an idea of the supernatural that's involved. So I started researching that, and I was just amazed at the number of ghost stories and supernatural accounts, both of rock stars who have passed on and rock stars who have had supernatural encounters themselves. So when I walked away from that project, a lot of times I'm really just trying to find compelling, believable, fun ghost stories to tell in these books. But I always have the habit of trying to figure out why this is so interesting and why people tell these stories. I mean, some of these stories are decades old. But I walked away thinking, well, there's something special about rock and roll. Maybe it's just the kind of the cultural milieu of all the different people who have played a part in it. Maybe it's because it's an outsider art. The people that are attracted to it tend to come from all different backgrounds. So I thought rock and roll was special. Then when I started into country music and looking into the ghost stories there, I found just about as many ghost stories in country music genre as I did in rock and roll. And now I kind of have a new idea about this. I really believe that music is a spiritual technology, and that people who are into music, whether musicians or fans, tend to be a little more open to the supernatural, and they're also open with people sharing their stories about the supernatural. So that's one of the reasons why I think country music ghost stories was fascinating for me to work on, and that's really what it's about. It's about the supernatural lore of people who were musicians in country music. Their supernatural encounters, as well as some of the stars who have passed on and what they've left in the afterlife.
Well, Matthew, do you think the country music genre is more ghostly than, let's say, other forms of rock and roll and music?
Well, as far as volume, I would say it's equal, but I will tell you there are some similarities and differences between, let's say...
Because you've looked at both.
Right. And the similarities are, first of all, just the volume. The number of ghost stories that are told about country musicians is probably equal to the ones we talk about in haunted rock and roll. So you have that. The other thing is you have big personalities. When you talk about these celebrities, you talk about people being larger than life. In a lot of ways, these ghost stories prove that. Something about them we want to retain and hold on to. So you have in rock and roll, you have ghost stories about, let's say, Jim Morrison and Elvis Presley. In country music, Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, big in life and big in the afterlife as well. So that's the other similarity. The other thing that I found similar between these two genres is that tragedy inspires ghost stories, and probably every paranormal researcher has told you that. But the similarities for me in haunted rock and roll, I wrote about Buddy Holly's crash site in Clear Lake, Iowa, and how people go there on the anniversary and claim to hear sounds like a plane crash and screams and similar phenomena there. Patsy Cline, who died in a plane crash as well in Tennessee, people have kind of experienced the same things there and have talked about it. So those are the similarities. The differences I found between rock and roll and country music, ghost lore and ghost stories, is that rock and roll definitely has more of an edge to it. You don't have Aleister Crowley running around with Johnny Cash or Hank Williams. You don't have the element of shamanism or, Jimmy Page's Bullskin House near Loch Ness. So rock and roll has more of an edge to it. Country music generally has this idea of it's a traditional idea of you have a body and a spirit. When your body dies, your spirit lives on, and sometimes it gets attached to the places where you're familiar with or the places that you love. So that comes up a little more often in Ghosts of Country Music than it does haunted rock and roll. So I think those are the similarities and differences between the genres.
Well, and you mentioned Patsy Cline, for example, dying in a plane crash, as some of the other rock and roll people did too. Does that contribute to the haunting, the tragedy of the death?
Yeah, it seems to. Especially any tragedy, and any time a life seems to be taken earlier than you would think. So, in rock and roll, we have the 27 Club. These people were very young. They're 27, probably most of them at the height of their careers. And those people that are on the 27 Club, in a lot of cases, inspire ghost stories. In country, you have Hank Williams, who was only 29. Now, I always thought of Hank dying at like 56.
Hank died in the back of a car, didn't he?
He did, yeah, as part of that infamous legendary death ride. Patsy Cline was only 30 years old. So there's this idea of tragedy and almost like an unfinished life is the way I feel when I'm writing these things that
right.
these ghosts are attempting to tell us.
And Hank was 29, right?
He was 29, right?
God, look how young they all were. We've done stories, Matthew, on the 27 Club, a number of rock stars and musicians who died at the age of 27, but look at all the others who were really close to that as well. Hank Williams, 29, Patsy Cline, of course, 30, as you mentioned. Gosh, there are a lot of them that just died way too early.
Yeah, and under such unfortunate circumstances, too. And I think that's why we have this draw to them, too.
I think so, too. What about Johnny Cash?
Johnny Cash, now, he was fascinating to investigate because I have always known Johnny Cash as a spiritual person, a very deeply honest man. But what I didn't know is just the depth that he had as far as investigating the supernatural. I kind of consider him now a pioneer ghost hunter. He was involved in spiritualism. He actively tried to contact spirits, and he had some incredible ghost stories, encounters that happened to him in his summer home in Jamaica called Cinnamon Hill. And one of them is just kind of floored me because he said that he would invite some of his friends down to this summer house, and they had a dinner party one night. And by the way, this place, Cinnamon Hill, was reputed to be haunted before Johnny owned it. And he said that as they were at this dinner party, they saw a woman in a full-length white gown walk through the door, and the door was closed, walk around the dinner party, and then exit out the other closed door of the dining room. And then they later heard this kind of loud tapping, loud knocking noise. And so as a journalist, I kind of know the difference between ghost lore and ghost accounts. This is a classic ghost account. You have multiple witnesses. You have a Johnny Cash, who's an eminently honest guy, telling you this story in his biography. What I've also found out is that his spirit apparently has remained in Cinnamon Hill, too, as well as his wife's.
And with Johnny Cash, of course, he lived at a little riper age than these other people that we've been talking about.
Sure did.
Achieving stuff. Didn't have a particularly great voice, but he had a great style, didn't he?
He had a great style. And again, I always bring up about his honesty. I mean, his songs were so rich, and he wasn't afraid to explore different. When you came in, when the music that played at the beginning, that was actually Johnny Cash doing a Bob Dylan song. So he was
That's right.
he was respected by rock stars and country musicians and just about everyone who knew him. and anytime you hear that voice, you know that's Johnny Cash. And what I found is that when people are in Cinnamon Hill, they've had EVPs and electronic voice phenomena, and they say it's definitely Johnny Cash because you can just tell by the voice.
Back to Hank Williams, you say that he was one of the country's most prolific ghosts. Tell me about that.
Right. Hank was he was one of these guys in life that just a brilliant songwriter, a great singer, and certainly prolific. He was also pretty tortured, and as many artists are. And when he had this one persona called Luke the Drifter, and as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the first concept albums. I think it beats Sgt. Pepper, where he takes this persona on as Luke the Drifter. And so what I found writing the book was that persona, that idea of this drifting, tortured soul, continues in a lot of his ghost stories. His ghost stories go the whole way around the Southeast, anywhere from his home in Montgomery, Alabama. That's kind of his home base. He's seen in Nashville. He's really seen all over that area of the country. So I kind of consider him the haunted country superstar.
Patsy Cline's friend, Loretta Lynn, who's still a great talent, no stranger to the paranormal.
No, absolutely not. And I put her on the list with Johnny Cash as the most supernaturally aware country musician.
Do you mention her in the Ghost of Country Music?
I do, and I really put her in there because of her supernatural encounters, which starts as a kid. One of the first stories she tells about is that she went out trick-or-treating one night. It sounds like she was doing a little more tricking than treating, but she went up onto the porch of a neighborhood lady's house, and I think they were soaping the window. And when they looked in, they saw the woman who owned the house inside the house. Her back was facing them, so they continued to soap. And then as they left, they saw the same woman walking up from the garden, and of course they took off running. And she said that was her first encounter with what they called in Appalachia a haint, which is a ghost. But since then, she's had dozens and dozens of other run-ins with ghosts, especially in her estate, Hurricane Mills. And that's probably one of the most documented hauntings. She's invited ghost hunters there. But her family has run into ghosts. Her twin girls apparently saw ghosts, and when they described them, they had hairstyles and dress that was not from that era. It was from an earlier era. So there were just tons of ghost stories there. That's kind of why I included her in the book.
You talk about a paranormal partnership of Johnny Cash, of course, the other country singer Johnny Horton, Merle Kilgore, who was Hank Williams' manager, and then J. Bernard Ricks. What is this partnership?
Well, that was one of the kind of the cool finds. A lot of times people write books because they know so much about the topic. I write it because I don't know enough, and one of the things I found super fascinating was this paranormal partnership. And as you mentioned, Johnny Cash, Johnny Horton, Merle Kilgore, they met a interesting guy named J. Bernard Ricks, and Ricks apparently met, I want to say, Johnny Horton as part of the Louisiana Hayride, which is a radio show in Shreveport. And Ricks was actually a medium, and they started to form this kind of circle where they were investigating the paranormal. They were using Ricks as a medium, and there were a couple of very strange run-ins. Merle Kilgore credited Ricks for saving his baby. He called his wife, Ricks called Merle Kilgore's wife and said, "Please check on your child." And she said, "Well, I just, laid her down, so she's fine." And then he begged her to go check. So she got up and checked, and sure enough, the baby was turning blue. So he definitely had these kind of powers, and there was almost like this guru-like relationship between those three in their investigations. Later, after Johnny Horton dies tragically, Johnny Cash said that J. Bernard Ricks helped him connect with Merle Kilgore. With Johnny Horton. When Johnny Horton died, the story is that he reached out to Johnny Cash, and Johnny Cash refused to take the phone call. He refused to accept the charges. So that kind of haunted Johnny Cash. And then before the funeral, Johnny Cash was talking to Merle Kilgore alone, and he started to say, he started to talk about Johnny Horton, and he said, he's at a better place. Bright will be the day where he's at now. It'll be bright as day where he's at. And then during the funeral, Johnny Cash notices J. Bernard Ricks is writing in a notebook, scribbling. So after the funeral, Johnny Cash asks him, could I see your notebook? And sure enough, among the scribbles are various signs that indicate he's talking to Johnny Horton. And at one point, he writes almost verbatim what Johnny Cash had said to Merle Kilgore, bright as this day. So I just found that whole era of that country music very fascinating.
Do you remember, too, when the music died, back with the rock and roll group that crashed? As you were mentioning, Waylon Jennings, who was supposed to be on the plane, did not go and said, as they were leaving, as a joke, hope your plane crashes.
Yeah, and haunted him ever since.
Yes, it sure did. It sure did. Matthew, stay with us. We're going to come back in a moment. We'll talk a little bit more about the ghosts. What about Elvis Presley stories? Any ghost stories there? The Grand Ole Opera, is that a haunted place? And so many others next on Coast to Coast AM. And then next hour, we'll open up the phone lines to give you an opportunity with this interactive show of talking with Matthew Swain, author of Ghosts of Country Music. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. If you go to our website, coasttocoastam.com, take a look at the highlight reel. It's one of the buttons there, one of the 4 buttons you'll see. UFOCon 2017 coming up in just a few weeks near San Francisco. I'll be there and so many other great ufologists, so come on up. It shall be a great event. I'm really looking forward to it. Matthew Swain with us, his latest book, Ghosts of Country Music. Matthew, where can people get this book?
It's available right now at Amazon.com, also Barnes & Noble, BN.com, and any bookstore. And if they don't have it, please ask for it to bring it in.
Tell us a little bit about Elvis Presley. He had a little bit of country music in him, didn't he?
Yeah, he really did. A lot of people don't realize this, but he started out as a country musician. He tried out for the Grand Ole Opry. Of course, he was rejected kind of famously or infamously, but he also was on the Louisiana Hayride show with a lot of country musicians. So that's why I wrote about him in the book. I kind of consider him the crossover king. He's a little country, he's a little rock and roll, and his ghost stories are everywhere throughout the country.
They still are.
From Memphis to New Orleans to Las Vegas, people have had encounters with Elvis Presley's ghost. Probably the center of it is at Graceland, where his ghost has been seen. People have said that they have come encounter with Gladys, his mother, as well as his grandmother is supposedly haunting this. And new in this book, there is actually a lady who claims she saw the ghost of, let me get this right, the ghost of Elvis's horse on the ground.
Elvis's horse.
Yes, she said that she was at Graceland on one of the tours. I toured Graceland too, and I didn't know there were barns or fields behind there, but she said she saw a horse running back to the barn, and then as a lark, she talked to one of the guides and said, is that horse one of the lineage of Elvis's horse? And this guy said, well, there are no horses there. They were taken to another stable for the season. So she claims that she saw Elvis's horse's ghost.
What about one of his pink Cadillacs?
They have to be around there somewhere, too.
It could be. Okay, let's talk about some of the haunted locations. When you did the research for the book, what else is out there?
Well, Ryman Auditorium, I have to say, is, it's considered the mother church of country music, so it's also the mother church of Ghosts of Country Music, too. And what I discovered...
That's in Nashville, right?
In Nashville, yeah, which is a haunted city in itself. But what I found was when we think of Ryman Auditorium, we tend to think of country music. But actually, and the Grand Ole Opry radio show, which started there, but it was actually built for sacred music and for gospel music. And there are some paranormal researchers who claim that's what led to a little bit of a paranormal problem. The story goes that the founder of the Ryman, who is a gentleman named Captain Thomas Ryman, that he haunts the Ryman, and he was early on was not actually such a nice guy. He was involved with gambling. He was a riverboat captain, owned casinos. There's some rumors of brothels out there too. And a preacher came to Nashville and started converting souls for Christianity there. And Captain Ryman was not really happy about it because it was kind of taken from his customer base. So he went down to the revival meeting to heckle this preacher and probably to intimidate him out of the city. Captain Ryman ended up converting to Christianity. He built the Ryman to be a place for sacred music. And then later on, what happened was they started to book country acts. And according to one story, there was one performer who was pretty on the saucy side, and as she was performing, the people in the audience heard these explosions, these loud bangs that grew to such a volume that it drowned out the lady on stage, and she ended up having to quit the performance. And everyone thought that was related to Thomas Ryman's ghost, who came back to try to stop that. So there are stories like that. There's also the story of the gray man, or the man in gray, who haunts the Ryman. Some people say that that's Thomas Ryman, but there are others who suggest that it might be a Confederate veteran or a Confederate soldier who goes there. These stories are usually kind of typical. A performer will be rehearsing, and they'll see this gentleman walk in and take a seat throughout the performance, and then after the rehearsals, they go to talk to this guy, and he's gone. So that's the gray man, as well as our friend Hank Williams reportedly haunts the Ryman, and also Patsy Cline has been seen there.
What is your explanation, Matthew, for why these occurrences happen?
I really go back to the idea that it's based on one music. I think music is a spiritual technology. I think it tends to connect us to the supernatural. If you think about it, music really kind of brings about transcendent experiences. For instance, if you're riding down the road and you hear a song from your childhood, instantly you seem to be, taken back to that era. Or if you hear a singer with a lyric that really strikes you, suddenly you feel almost like a connection, a telepathy. So I think, and just beyond that, think about how religions inspire these types of beliefs, and how, if you go to an Elvis Presley concert or you've seen pictures of that, how closely related that is to a revival, meeting. So I think it raises our consciousness. I think it lets us be more open to the supernatural. So I think someplace like the Ryman or Opryland, we go in there with this kind of raised expectation and consciousness, and that leads to some of these experiences, whether they are actual ghost encounters or whether they're just this idea that you want to be so close to these departed people that you're willing to consider that their spirits live on.
It's amazing what's going on. Has anybody ever been haunted to the point Because so far, all of these seem to be fun. But what about some serious hauntings from them?
Well, as far as serious hauntings, I would have to say Bobby Mackey's. That's probably one of the most famous hauntings in country, and it's a roadhouse. It's kind of a bar. But earlier on, I think I talked about the differences in country music, and I said, rock and roll has more of an edge. Well, the ghost stories at Bobby Mackey's are really rock and roll. I mean, there's suggestions of satanic worship there, demonic possessions. There's folklore and folk tales about murders that happen there, and so that's one that I have to say is one of the more serious hauntings. And I talked to several ghost hunters who have been there, and I write some of their accounts. I actually talked to one of the ladies who leads the ghost tours of Bobby Mackey's, and the spectrum of the haunting ranges from typical ghost lore to serious encounters. One worker claimed that he was possessed while he was working there, and it led to an exorcism on site. So that's a real serious, spooky, creepy, when I was writing it, I kind of had to do it in the daytime type of thing.
Matthew, so of everything that you have written, what would you call your favorite character in the book, the weirdest story?
Well, my favorite character, it turns out, is J. Bernard Ricks. And I think he's my favorite because he's a bit of a mystery. He sort of appears out of nowhere. I find some very little details that maybe he was a post office worker, and then he meets these country stars. He kind of becomes this spiritual guide to them, and then he also writes for the Chimes, which is a spiritualist magazine. He gets involved with investigating psychic surgery in the Philippines, and then he sort of disappears. So I think he's the most fascinating character in the book. As far as the weirdest stories, I have to say that it's Elvis's horse. I think that's the one that strikes me as probably the weirdest. I would have to think if there's some strange ones going on there, though.
And it's kind of interesting following in this genre. Did you have a difficult time getting the stories, or did they flow easily to you?
Finding them is usually easy. I use, online sources, newspapers, magazines, biographies. What I find is that trying to get the first-person accounts is a little more difficult from the average person. And, and I kind of understand that. It's for some people, it might be a little embarrassing to say, I saw the ghost of Elvis Presley. I had people tell me, they've experienced stuff, but when I asked them to use their names, they were reluctant. So often what I do is rely on ghost hunters and paranormal researchers and people in that kind of realm who, first of all, give me first-person encounters, but they're also pretty believable and credible, and they also know the difference between natural phenomena and this kind of supernatural phenomena.
Matthew Swain with us, the name of his book, Ghosts of Country Music. What about a website, Matthew?
You can get a hold of me at www.mattswain.com, and that's SWAYNE. I find it so egotistical that I have a website like that, but marketing is part of this.
Yeah, well, it sure is. Now, do you personally believe in ghosts or these stories?
I kind of walk a thin line. I remain open to it. I've never had anything happen to me that I can go to the level of paranormal. I've definitely had weird things happen to me, but I will tell you, after writing this stuff more and more, I become more and more open to the idea. I just haven't been convinced either way, that either ghosts can exist or that ghosts do exist.
Do you believe in life after death?
I do. Maybe not in kind of the way that it's portrayed traditionally, which is that idea of I have the spirit and the spirit will go on. I think it's probably much deeper. I don't want to get too weird on you, but I think
get weird. That's the show. You know that.
Okay, well, I do believe that there is, a consciousness that pervades all, and that's probably how life goes on. I don't believe in an end.
So if you were a physicist, I would ask you, how do you think the Big Bang started? Thank God you're not a physicist, right?
Right.
I cannot get a good answer from anybody I've interviewed over all these years to tell me what they think really happened.
And you're not going to get one from me.
No. I mean, it's one of the most perplexing questions ever. How could something start like that from apparently nothing? And then if they say, well, it wasn't nothing, there was something, then how did it start? Nobody can answer that.
Then you have the multiverse theory and all of those theories that are just really actually metaphysical speculations.
That's why I think ghost stories are real, because we can't explain how we even got here. I'm taking the religious implications out for a moment here.
Sure.
But we can't even explain that. So the ghost end of it is probably very natural.
Yeah, and also there's kind of two ways to, and I think about this way too much when I'm writing this, but materialism is this idea that you have matter, and then consciousness comes from that. But there's another whole, metaphysical philosophy of idealism that can incorporate materialism. So what we're experiencing here is just kind of a smear of probabilities within this larger consciousness, but then so can these ghosts, and they can be more like archetypes. That's kind of how I look at it. I look at it almost as a Jungian thing, that when you see the ghost of Hank Williams, you're actually seeing a lot more. When I tell these stories of Hank Williams and Patsy Cline, I'm really talking about something on a much deeper level about why these people, their messages, their songs appeal to us on such a deep level that we're not willing to let them go. So whether what I really believe in is ghost stories, that's a social fact that we know these, we tell these. And so any of this other phenomena is really just kind of incorporated back into that.
Tell me about haunted jukeboxes.
Haunted jukeboxes. So there are, I think that jukeboxes are a sacred technology in country music, because there are several stories of jukeboxes being haunted. For instance, Bobby Mackey's, which we talked about, their jukebox is apparently plays Anniversary Waltz spontaneously. One story that I found for the book, I found it actually in a book written about Bobby Mackey's hauntings, was that police officer, there were apparently a lot of burglar alarms going off in Bobby Mackey's, mainly because of the paranormal activity going on, they say.
They set off all the activity, I guess.
Right. So they set off the alarm, and the officer came, and he heard the Anniversary Waltz playing. As soon as he enters the premises, the music cuts out, and he goes to the jukebox, and not the jukebox wasn't even plugged in. So
love it.
That's a haunted jukebox. There are a few places that one jukebox plays Patsy Cline tunes, so you at least know that the ghost there has good taste. And some other places where this phenomena happens, either the jukebox plays spontaneously. Another place is Ernestine and Hazel's in Memphis. I talked to a ghost hunter there who called out to the ghost to reveal itself, and it actually played a song related to the question right after he issued that command. So country music has a lot of those haunted jukebox stories.
Were there any specific country entertainers who dabbled with the occult?
Johnny Cash is the one who comes closest, I would say, with his involvement with spiritualism. But I wouldn't
like
say,
Ouija boards and stuff like that.
I did not come across Ouija boards even when Johnny Cash tried to communicate with spirits. It seemed more like he was using mediums.
Okay.
And with Johnny Cash, I think it all goes back to losing his brother at such a young age, and I think that affected him deeply. And I think he felt a little guilt about that as well, and always wanted to reach out to the other side.
This has got to be exciting for you. Are you more of a ghost hunter or a journalist?
I'm definitely a journalist. Ghost hunters have the worst hours. I can only imagine, to be mucking about at a house at 1 a.m. So I've never actually gone on a ghost hunt. I've been invited several times. But what I feel is that what I bring to these books is that I'm impartial. So I want to give both sides of view. I want to give a skeptical eye to certain things, but I also want to make sure that the people who've experienced this stuff feel respected and welcome to give their stories to me. And I feel that if I would go out on a ghost hunt, it would be lose-lose for me, because if I would experience something, I would probably become more of a believer. If I didn't experience anything, I'd probably become more of a cynic, and I think then that bias would suffer.
Good point. Matthew, we're going to come back and take phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM as we talk about ghosts of country music. We're talking ghosts of country music. That was Patsy Cline you just heard. Matthew Swain with us. We'll get to your calls in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back. Matthew Swain with us. Ghosts of country music. When you wrote Haunted Rock and Roll, Matthew, tell me your approach there.
My approach there was just to go out. Again, I knew that there was some occult legends, so I immediately started to try to figure out, using some of these ideas that tragedy, bigger-than-life personalities tend to attract the most ghost stories. And so I started with those folks and tried to find places where they lived, and then I would use online sources to see if I could find any ghost stories around there. And then from that point, I would try to seek out firsthand accounts or talk to ghost hunters who might investigate those areas. Some of the places I have been, just coincidentally, but I didn't incorporate a lot of those stories into it.
Stadiums can be haunted too, you say?
Yeah, they sure can. There are a few, especially in country music
cities,
ghost lore. For instance, Shreveport Municipal Auditorium is one. I talked about it earlier. It's the home of Louisiana Hayride, and it's been investigated. They're very open to ghost hunters. At least when I was writing that, they let people in to investigate. And they say, I think it's located on Elvis Presley Boulevard there. So it's haunted by Elvis. Hank Williams is there, Patsy Cline. And there have been these EVPs, these recordings of Johnny Cash there. And in fact, the one strange story is that they say that some of the fans are still haunting there. They have people have been there and heard screaming girls and fans cheering as they open the doors. Some other stories are that there are doors that open and close by themselves. So that place is haunted. And then Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Patsy Cline is reportedly still there. That was her last show. It was a benefit concert for a DJ who died, and then she left there and perished in a plane crash.
When most of them die, are they the ones that are doing the hauntings?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have a very good answer for it because, again, you get into this whole notion of, is it the fans who want to see their star, their favorite musician, or is it the musician that actually leaves a little piece of themselves back in those places?
It's going to take some calls here for you, Matthew, as they begin to line up. We have Steve, truck driving in Los Angeles. Welcome to the program. Hi, Steve. Go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. Anyway, I look forward to your third book, Haunted Blues. I mean, that's got to be going to happen.
Hey, that's a great idea. And certainly there would be enough material there with a lot of the haunted juke joints, and I would have probably a whole chapter of ghost stories about Robert Johnson.
Oh, absolutely, and especially the nameless ones. I used to drive from the southeast. I'd stop anywhere I could and not get stuck in the mud and hang out for a while, and just the stories I heard and overheard were just fantastic. But what I was actually calling to ask you about is that I used to live in Bakersfield, and a couple blocks from my house there was the Crystal Palace, Buck Owens' place, and if you had any information or stories on that.
No, I did look into that, and I personally want Buck Owens still to be around. I found some just a few stories that the place was haunted before Buck, but I couldn't get any confirmation, so I kind of left that out of the book. But yeah, I really wanted that to happen. Now, have you ever come across any stories from Preston Castle?
He hung up.
Oh, okay.
But tell me about Preston Castle.
Well, Preston Castle was where Merle Haggard had spent some time. It was, it was kind of an institution for wayward boys, and Merle was one of those folks. And the one story is that a woman, a worker, was killed there, and that she haunts that place. And I tried to find if Merle ever talked about it, because he would have been there after that murder. So he never mentioned anything. But that's I kind of equate, when he mentions Bakersfield, I think about the Bakersfield Sound, and then when I think of Bakersfield Sound, I think of Buck Owens and Merle Haggard.
Matthew, how do we know that ghosts haven't been responsible for some of the tragic deaths of some of these country stars?
That's also an interesting question, and it didn't make it into the book, but there is somewhat of an underground legend that the Ryman is cursed. And I think there were like 30-some people who performed at the Ryman who later died tragically, and we could put Hank Williams there, Patsy Cline. I don't have much more to go on than that. So could it be Captain Ryman wreaking of revenge on these secular singers? I don't know, but there's room for a sequel then.
Sure is. Okay, let's go to Joe in the Bronx on the wild card line.
How
Joseph.
You doing, George?
Good.
How are you?
Still there, Joe?
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask your guest, George, if there are any haunted recording studios. There's a famous photo of Elvis, Johnny Cash, and Carl Perkins. Do you have any haunted recording studio stories?
Well, I think the one you're referring to is Sun Studios, and in both books I attempted to find ghost stories about Sun Studios because I was there. And my story is that when I was there, the guide took us over to the microphone stand, and he put me and my friends there, and then he said, at the exact spot that you're standing, Johnny Cash sang this song, and then he played a Johnny Cash song, and the chills that I felt. Now I can't say that it was supernatural or anything, but boy, you just feel the presence of those legends there. So I spent literally hours and days trying to find a confirmed person that would go on record or an article where they talk about the hauntings. I have yet to find that. I have talked to people who have talked to people who say that Sun Studios is haunted. In rock and roll, there are several, and I'm getting some reports that Prince's studio, Paisley Park, is haunted. So, I'm working on those, but I didn't have any haunted studios for country that I can remember.
Check out one called The Mansion, which is a mansion studio.
Rick Rubin's.
That's right, on Laurel Canyon in L.A., and that apparently is haunted. And apparently one of the owner's sons at the time pushed his girlfriend off the balcony or something like that.
I wrote about that in Haunted Rock and Roll. And that one, you're absolutely right. And there are a few rock and roll haunted studios.
Let's go to Don in Oregon, west of the Rockies. Hi, Don. Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. There's an old song. It's done by, I believe his name is Roy Buchanan, I think back in the 70s, country western song. But he talks about chasing a haint out of his house. I don't remember what the title of the song is, but it's got the word haint in it. But a lot of the old country and western songs or whatever, there's a lot about verses about ghosts and hauntings and things like that. That's all I got, guys. Thanks.
Okay. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't heard that of that song. I do know that Merle Kilgore wrote a song about the Bell Witch, and Johnny Cash wrote the Ballad of Annie Palmer, who was a was known as they think was a witch or was involved in voodoo and killed her husband, a couple husbands apparently, as well as some of her slaves. And that estate was located near Johnny Cash's Cinnamon Hill.
These jukeboxes, Matthew, that play when they're not even plugged in, do they even have the disc or the music in the jukebox, or does that just pop up?
Sometimes that just pops up because I think it was when I wrote about this jukebox that played Patsy Cline. I don't think Patsy Cline's songs were even in the jukebox at that time.
It just plays it on its own.
Yep.
Perry in Santa Barbara, California is on the wild card line. Hi, Perry. Perry, you with us? Nope. The ghost took him away. Let's try Richie, though, in West Virginia. Go ahead, Richie.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, Richie.
Gentlemen?
Thank you.
Hey, how you guys doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Hey, I just happened to be calling from the town that Hank Williams happened to pass away in Oak Hill, West Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah, the spot he actually died is actually right around the corner from where I live.
Synchronicity.
Right across from the Oak Hill Library. And I basically one of the last stops of the story that he stopped at was at a little restaurant called the Skyline Drive in Hilltop, West Virginia. You go back the old road waiting to come in, and that's where the driver pulled over at a gas station that's no longer there, and that's where he supposedly had died mysteriously. But have you ever had any stories of any hauntings from the Hank Williams trail or anything here? I mean, I've never heard anything, and I've lived here all my life.
There are ghost stories all up along...
all over the place, right?
Yeah, especially along this legendary death ride, which starts in Nashville. And the story goes that Hank was not feeling well, and he contacted a driver to drive his, I think it's a 52 Cadillac, to a gig in Ohio. And it would be somewhat comic if it wasn't so tragic. I think he tried to take a flight. There's one story that the weather diverted him. The other story is that he was just too drunk and disorderly.
Yeah. Died in the back seat of the car, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is, and then he goes to Knoxville. He stays at the Andrew Johnson Hotel, and then they drive. And as the caller said, he dies in West Virginia. But you have ghost stories in Nashville with him. He reportedly haunts the Andrew Johnson, which I don't think is a hotel anymore, but people have said they've seen this long, lanky figure, a shadow walking down the halls, and it looks be about the size of Hank Williams. And then I did get some people who said that or reported that they have seen the ghost of Hank Williams right where that caller was, right around that gas station, and have heard Hank Williams songs being played mysteriously. So there, all along that trail, you'll find ghosts of Hank Williams.
Why do we still get stories of Elvis sightings that he's still alive?
I wonder that too, and the issue I have, especially when I'm writing about Elvis, is there's just so many layers of this. So if you consider this, there are some people that believe Elvis is still alive, and then you have some people who believe Elvis is a ghost. Then you have people who impersonate Elvis. And then you have people who, his friends, who dressed like him, acted like him. So when you're looking at an Elvis ghost story, for instance, for me, there was a picture circulated, I think, right after Elvis died in the late 70s, and it seemed to show Elvis in the pool house sitting rather relaxed. But a lot of people say, well, that proves that he's still alive. There were other people who said maybe that was just an Elvis impersonator who wandered into the house. Other people said, well, that's one of Elvis's friends. You know, he had this posse, the Memphis Mafia. And so it's really hard to tell whether or not this is a ghost story or simply an urban legend revolving around Elvis. I think what it says is just how profoundly Elvis has affected us, that we just can't let him go.
We can't let go.
We want him to be alive, or whether we want him as a ghost.
I remember as a kid, they said that John F. Kennedy was in a vegetative state, but still alive. And it's just strange how these stories just keep, growing and growing and growing. People just can't let go.
Right. And I think that's it. That's exactly right.
We have Barry in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Hello, Barry.
You might know, George. I'll tell you what now, I've got a good paranormal and ghost type rock and roll story. Do either one of y'all remember the time that Jerry Lee Lewis set his piano on fire because he had to play before Chuck Berry, the headliner of a rock show?
I heard about that.
Heard that.
Yes. Well, he got to where he was carrying around about a half of a trunk load of Ronco lighter fluid, and when he got mad about things like that, he would set his piano on fire. Well, one night he was on a show with little Jimmy Dickens, and String Bean was on there. I don't remember if you remember both of those names.
I remember String Bean.
Yep. Anyway, he was tragically killed. He and his wife both murdered by some people broke in his house, but that's a different story. Anyway, Jerry Lee had played last. He was the headliner. So they'll get ready. They were outside, get ready to leave, just talking. And Jimmy Dickens and String Bean, they were there when Jerry Lee opened his trunk to put some luggage and stuff in there, a big Cadillac or whatever. And he had a whole bunch of cases of this Ronco lime fluid. And they said, "My God, man, if you have a car wreck of any kind, that stuff is going to blow up like dynamite." And sure enough, they unloaded about 3/4 of it and threw it in a dumpster type trash can or something way back. Oh, this is about 10 years after it had happened, with Chuck Berry. And I want you to know that Jerry Lee was leaving the show at about 4 in the morning, drunk, all of them drunk, and this other drunk came roaring up behind him in the parking lot of the honky tonk and crashed into the back of the Cadillac and started a fire that didn't blow, and they all three jumped out and ran like hell and got a certain amount away, and all what was left of that lighter fluid blew up.
Oh,
jeez. Yes, that's a great story. Super story. And he's right. Jerry Lee Lewis was going to be on stage with Chuck Berry, who's 90 years old, by the way, and just has another album coming out, and he's still touring. That's what's amazing. But he didn't want to be upstaged by Chuck Berry, so he burned his piano down.
I've never heard that story, but it certainly sounds like our Jerry Lee, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Matthew, take a couple seconds here, mention your website again, and where we can get your books.
www.mattswain.com, and you can find it on at Amazon.com. Just add Ghosts of Country Music to the search engine there, and it should pop up. Please visit your bookstores and see that it's in there. And also, if you can give me a good Amazon.com review, that would be great.
Super. We're going to come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast with Matthew Swain, and we are going to take final phone calls, so don't touch your dial. George Noory back with you, and Matthew Swain with us, our final segment as we talk about his work, Ghosts of Country Music. Very thorough job, by the way, Matthew, and what a unique subject. Good for you.
Thank you very much. But I have to say, your listeners are amazing. They're reaching out to me now with stories of the Crystal Palace and Preston Castle, and it just amazes me. The last time I was on here, I had a similar reaction with haunted rock and roll. I really feel like I've only scratched the surface of these things, and that a lot of these stories remain oral. They're just friends telling friends stories, and unless you're in that circle. So a show like this introduces me to a whole new realm of this type of stuff.
We have, by far, the most intelligent audience that listens to radio of any show, any place. And, I mean, we get all this stuff every day, early day, those kind of shows. Mm-hmm. But this audience is so well-educated, informed. They know things from everything, current events to ghosts, searching for Bigfoot. They're on top of things. It's just amazing. It really is. Matthew, as you look at this, and you're middle of the road, but have you had skeptics come up to you saying, come on, I don't believe this about ghosts or this or the ghost of Hank Williams?
I work as a research writer, so there are a lot of awkward pauses when I, say I write about this stuff. But what I find is that people in groups tend to have a party line. But when they're individuals, you all of a sudden see that they're kind of open and they do have their doubts. It might be a believer who might have a doubt in that and become more skeptical. It might be a skeptic who becomes more of a believer. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the epilogue in the book about some of my experiences with skeptics. But one of my favorite stories about a skeptic is that after a book signing, this lady came up to me and she said, I don't believe in ghosts. I'm a complete skeptic. And I thought, oh, no, here it comes. But she said, I learned so much about rock and roll from reading this book, and I'm more interested in learning about these people. So if at the end of the day, tomorrow someone would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that ghosts don't exist to me, I would still say that this stuff is important. It's important because it carries on these legends of these really important artists.
Let's go to the phones again. Keith in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the show. Hi, Keith.
Hello. Patsy Cline and Joseph Stalin died exactly 10 years apart. Stalin, the 5th of March, 1953. Miss Cline, the 5th of March, 1963. Another example, Andy Griffith of the Mayberry Show sang country gospel. He and Marilyn Monroe were born on the same day, the 1st of June, 1926. From a point of numbers and pure symmetry, things symmetrical, do you think in the universe different spirits, especially good and evil, or just spirits who never on earth would have thought of being in touch with each other? Do you think, since you believe in an afterlife, that in the universe, just from their numbers, dimension, and just them maybe interacting in the divine, if Patsy Cline were to come into the presence of the spirit of Stalin, would there have been a neutralizing effect, without me being foolish? Would different spirits who would have acted differently on Earth, would they be changed in the afterlife? I've always wondered, since Andy Griffith was a pretty good guy, if he had ever come into Marilyn Monroe's life while she was alive, so much hurting, could Andy Griffith have changed Marilyn's life around? They're just different semblances of life in the here and now that when they were living and now past. I'm just wondering for you, sir, if they ever interact.
That's very interesting.
And do you believe in heaven and hell, Matthew?
I don't.
Okay.
I believe in those as dimensions of consciousness.
So you don't think Joseph Stalin is burning in brimstone, or
He might be doing some karmic retraining, I would say.
Okay, but go ahead. I'll let you react to Keith's question.
Well, yeah, you do come across a lot of these numeric, some would say coincidences, synchronicities. It's actually an idea I'm trying to build out for another book about celebrity synchronicities. But Robert Johnson, who a lot of people consider the grandfather of rock and roll, that famous blues player, he died on August 16th, 1938. And, of course, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, he dies also on August 16th, 1977. So there are these numeric coincidences that I find throughout the book. Again, Gary Patterson, I think, does a much better job at exploring those.
Gary's one of the best. I've done some live stage shows, and, of course, he's been on our show a zillion times. But he's a dedicated researcher. He's baffled by the 27 Club, all those stars that died at the age of 27. Yeah, he's in shock over that.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, he, for me, originated the whole idea of the 27 Club. I can't really remember thinking about it before I read his book. And I touch on it in Haunted Rock and Roll, and some of the ideas that I came across was the idea that if you add the 2 and the 7, you get 9, which is the poet's number or the philosopher's number. There's another kind of legend that said Robert Johnson is the first member of the 27 Club. He dies at 27.
Yeah.
And so these other artists who die at 27 may have somehow signed their own deal with the devil.
Julia in Salt Lake City, Utah is with us now. Hi, Julia. Go ahead.
Hi. Originally, I'm from Lima, Peru, but I listen to this radio for more than 5 years, and that's very interesting people, especially you, George.
Thank you, Julia.
Anyway, my experience is regarded by my dad. When he died May 5, 1995, he was a heavy guy. He was very tall.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to pick up from the floor because he had cancer. And my mom, she always coming to help me to pick up my dad. But the day that he died, me with my little brother, would pick up my dad to put him from one bed to the other bed so he can take it to the morgue. He didn't have any weight. He was like his weight chain.
Huh.
It was very light.
Like a feather?
Yeah, my father, when he died, his weight changed, so he was heavy like was before. Then we had to.
That's strange. I've heard a little bit of the ghostly ectoplasm has some weight to it, but that was like in grams, not pounds.
Yeah, I've heard.
That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate that. Next up, let's go to Matt in Alabama. Welcome to the show. Hi, Matt.
Hey, first time getting on the show.
Where'd you go, Matt? You still there?
Yes.
Okay, good. I almost lost you.
That's okay.
You're just saying, first time on the show and you're gone.
Yeah.
No. But go ahead.
Yes, is this Brother George?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I just wanted to bring a Christian perspective to the program.
All right.
According to anybody that passes on, that goes to heaven, always takes their physical body with them, whether it be Moses in the book of Jude, or Jesus Christ when he ascended, or Enoch or Elijah. The physical body has to be there. What's in the ground is just the carcass basically, and at the last trump they'll have life again. So what you're seeing are what's called poltergeists, or mischievous spirits, or as the Bible calls them, familiar spirits. When you see like Aunt Effie, standing at the side of the bed and giving you a nice smile.
Are they tricksters?
Yes, exactly right.
Tricksters. What do you think of that, Matthew? Tricksters.
Well, that does come up a lot, and that's certainly some of the theories that they are trickster spirits that are interacting with people. So I have, and I've written a little bit about that and include that as a theory in some of those chapters, because it's in Western culture that's a very popular belief. And country music certainly would carry that on. I mean, when I talk about Thomas Ryman, the experience there of those loud rapping noises would be similar to a poltergeist. And that's one of the phenomena involved in numerous poltergeist encounters.
Doing the research for you for this book, Ghosts of Country Music, did you stumble across anything that was surprising or shocking to you?
I think I was more shocked and amazed with Johnny Cash's openness to the supernatural. I did not remember him ever telling ghost stories. But
really, do you think June Carter was that way too?
I think so.
His wife?
I think the whole group was. I think they were all believers. Now, I didn't come across anything where June talked about seeing a ghost or wrote in the biography, but Johnny was very open with his exploration in the supernatural.
Well, and he always wore black, didn't he?
He did. Yep.
I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
It possibly could, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, Matthew, do you travel much? Do you go to speaking engagements or, ghostly conventions?
I really haven't done that circuit so much. I do. I've gone on some book tours and locally. I talk about it a lot. Believe it or not, I work at Penn State, and they've been very actually encouraging about my approach to this. So I've talked on campus at a couple different venues about ghost lore and ghost stories, and especially what role they play in universities and maintaining the culture of universities.
Well, you do great work. In the name of the book, Ghosts of Country Music. For Nathan Staten, Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladasor, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borles, and George Knapp, I'm George Noory, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be